My fiancé and I met each other through mutual friends 4 years ago. We were at a small get-together, and I saw her from across the room and introduced myself. At the time, she was actually in a relationship with someone else, so she politely declined my invitation for dinner. About a month later, I got a text message from an unknown number only to see that it was her and she was single and hoped I was still interested. I was glad that she reached out. I hadn't been pining over her during the time we were apart or anything, but I was very interested in her before I knew she was with someone else. We went out and had a good time together. Things continued from there. I proposed to her on New Year's Eve in front of all of our friends. It was super romantic, and I knew that a lot of people saw our relationship as one to look up to. I thought I found my soulmate. My fiancée had a best friend, we'll call her Kate, and she was always at our apartment. I didn't usually mind because Kate and I got along well. I know that she was one of the most important people in my fiancé's life, so I wasn't going to say or do anything to upset her about it. I know that my fiancé was close with Kate's family as well. She and Kate met each other during college, and because my fiancé's family was out of state, Kate would invite her to Thanksgiving and Christmases and things like that. From what I understand, she was accepted as part of the family pretty quickly. I even met Kate's family on a few occasions because they wanted to meet me to see if they approved of me marrying my fiancé. It was all a little much from time to time, but I loved my fiancé and I got along well with them all. Kate's family was seemingly perfect on the outside, but they had their troubles. One day, my fiancé came to me and told me that Kate's parents were getting divorced. She was upset about it, almost like they were her own parents going through separation. Honestly, I did think that was a little weird, but I knew how close they all were. One day, I got home from work, and I saw that my fiancé had a bag packed and was carrying it out to the car with Kate. I asked what was going on, and she told me that Kate had come over upset, and they were going to her parents' house to console her father. He was apparently very upset and had been handling the separation very poorly. She told me I didn't need to go along, that I should just stay home and relax while she was away. I said goodbye to her, and aside from texting every now and then over the weekend, I didn't hear from her until she came back the following Monday. When I asked her about what happened, she seemed hesitant to tell me. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured she must have just had a stressful or emotional weekend because of her connection to the family. She told me that Kate's dad was a mess, and it was hard to see him that way. I felt bad for her because I knew she cared about him. I gave her a hug and tried to reassure her that there was a reason for everything, and if they thought divorce was the best option, then they were doing what was good for them. A couple of weeks went by and my fiancée told me that she was going back to Kate's parents' house. I was a little taken aback by her telling me that again. By no means did I think that Kate's dad would have just been over what was happening, but my fiancé going back over a second time seemed a little excessive. She came back the following Monday, and since then, she had been texting with Kate's dad often. It didn't really bother me when I first realized they were talking regularly. He was 20 years older than her and her best friend's father. I thought that she was happy with me and just reaching out to a friend to make sure they were okay. It started to be a problem when I heard her talking to him on the phone one day. I was supposed to be at work, but I forgot my reading glasses at home, so I ran to grab them on my lunch break. I overheard her in our bedroom talking to somebody and obviously flirting. She was giggling and laughing at the other end hysterically. I listened for a minute before I opened the bedroom door to see what was going on. She was on the phone and lying on the bed in a towel. When she saw me, she hung up and asked me why I was there. I asked her who she was talking to, and she told me that it was Kate's dad. I was surprised to hear that because it didn't seem like an appropriate time for her to be calling him. I asked about what was so funny, and she started explaining an inside joke they had to me. Honestly, even if I was in on the joke, I don't think I would have thought it was that funny. After seeing that, I was suspicious that there was something else going on. He had been taking up a significant part of our lives, seemingly out of nowhere, and after evaluating everything, I thought it was a problem. I didn't want to accuse my fiancée outright of having something with him, so I figured I would keep an eye on it. That very same weekend, she told me that she was going to Kate's dad's house again. I asked her if Kate was going, and she told me that Kate was meeting her there. I thought it was strange because normally when they went, Kate would come to our house and they would drive together. I didn't understand why they weren't doing that again. My suspicions were raised again. I didn't say anything instead. I told her to drive safely and thought about what I wanted to do. My gut was telling me that their relationship was more than just platonic, and I thought that I needed to prove that in some way. My fiance didn't use much social media. All of her communication was through her text messages, and she brought her phone with her. I had never been to Kate's parents' house, so I had no idea how to find her while she was there. The thought occurred to me that if my fiancé was doing something with Kate's dad, she wouldn't have told Kate she was going there. That might mean that Kate was still at her house. I grabbed my keys and drove right over. I saw her car in the driveway, which was not a good sign. That alone confirmed a lot of my suspicions. I tried to figure out what I was going to say, and then I knocked on the door. She was surprised to see me because I was apparently supposed to be going to my parents' house that weekend. At least, that's what my fiancé told her. It was clear that my fiancé lied to both of us so she could go off and do something on her own. I explained to Kate everything that I knew about her going to her dad's house. Kate was visibly pissed when I said that. I asked her why she was so upset, and she told me that she asked my fiancé not to see him anymore. She had been sensing something between them and didn't want my fiancé to throw away her relationship with me. On top of that, she didn't want her best friend to be messing around with her dad. She told me that we needed to go and see what was going on for ourselves. I followed her to his house and nervously anticipated what we would both find when we got there. Kate stormed out of her car when we arrived and saw my fiancé's car in the driveway. She had a key to get in, so she opened the door for us. We could tell that something was going on there. There were candles lit and glasses of wine sitting on the table. We heard music playing in the bedroom, and Kate asked me to go in because she didn't want to see her father having sex. I didn't want to see it either, but I took one for the team. I opened the door, and I found them right in the middle of sleeping together. Kate's dad thought I was an intruder at first, but then Kate yelled from around the corner for him to put his pants on and go out to the living room. We waited for them there, and both of them came out to find us after they got dressed. My fiancée looked like she had just been told she only had a day to live. She was distraught that I discovered her affair. She begged me to forgive her without even telling me anything about it. She tried to tell me that it was a mistake, but it seemed like something she had been planning for some time if it hadn't been going on already. Right there, I told her that the wedding was off and I asked for the ring back. I told her that we could no longer live together either. I wanted her out of the house as soon as possible. Kate's dad tried to explain and say that she was there for him and it just happened. Absolutely none of what I saw walking into that house made it seem like it was an accident. Neither of them could take responsibility for what they'd done. Kate was furious with both of them and told them that she didn't want to talk to them ever again. I figured it would be easier for her to cut off my fiancé, but her father, I imagined, would be more difficult. Honestly, I doubted she would not speak to him ever again, but their relationship would never be the same, and that would suck for them both. Kate and I eventually left and went back to her house. We unwound and got completely trashed that night. While we were drinking, she told me about all the things my fiancé told her about our relationship. Apparently, my fiancé was very interested in the security that I could give her. She wasn't necessarily interested in me for my looks, personality, or the amount of love I had for her. She told me that I could do better and hoped that I would get away from my fiancé. I had every intention of doing that. So, we broke off the engagement entirely and my fiancé was forced to move out of my house. I don't know where she went after that. Kate was her best friend in the world, and most of her other friends were also close with Kate. I'm sure none of them were happy that she slept with Kate's dad. It was quite the betrayal on her end. I do keep in contact with Kate, and she told me that she does not speak to her father. She is open to reconciling in the future, but there has been a lot of damage done, and she needs time to heal from that. So he lost his entire family in a short amount of time. OP, I would venture to say that your girlfriend had a crush on Kate's dad for a while before the divorce. She probably used his emotional state as an excuse to get close to him in some way. That's why she was so eager to go along all this time. She went to visit him with Kate. It's unclear if the time they were caught was the first time they had been together, but it wouldn't surprise me if they had hooked that first night when you mentioned her being distant. It's nice that you and Kate are still friends after going through something like that together. I know she was best friends with your fiancé while you were together, so a lot of the things she knew she probably couldn't tell you. But it was good of her to tell you the truth about your fiancé when she could. It was at least a good gesture to ensure you didn't go back with somebody toxic like that. Deciding to get married is difficult, and it might be easy to think all relationships could end up like this. But I hope you're able to find someone in the future who doesn't lie and will make sure the relationship is honest. Now, let's move on to our next story. My wife and I have been together for about 15 years. We met in the workplace, and we quickly found out that we enjoyed each other's company. We decided that we wanted to go on a date to see if our relationship could be more than platonic. While we were together, we had an incredible time, and we started dating. Fast forward 15 years, we had 2 wonderful children, a house in the suburbs, a vacation house at the shore, and a perfect little life. I thought she was the perfect partner. She was always there for me when I was stressed out, and she was an incredible homemaker for our children. We decided that being a stay-at-home mom was going to be the best for our needs, so I took care of the family financially, and she did in every other way. The beginning of the end for us came when my wife had a bad fall. She managed to tear one of the ligaments in her knee and had to keep it in a brace for quite some time before going to physical therapy. Things were a bit different at the house with her limited mobility, but I stepped up and did everything I could to keep things as normal as possible. She seemed to appreciate everything that I did to take care of her when she was having difficulty doing it herself. After all, we made vows that said in sickness and in health, and I took that seriously. The time came for her to start going to physical therapy, and she had to go through it alone. This was at a point during the pandemic when only patients could go into medical practices. However, my wife did have a couple of Zoom consultations with her physical therapist, so I got to meet him during those. He seemed like a nice young guy. He was newly graduated and he seemed eager to grow his client roster. He had a lot of technical knowledge, but I wasn't certain he had hands-on experience. I was apprehensive about him at first, but my wife raved about him after her first in-person session. If she was happy with him, that was good enough for me. She was the one going through the therapy, so that was the only opinion that mattered. She needed to go through several weeks of physical therapy so she could safely walk around without a brace on. It was a long time commitment for her, and I knew she had been very nervous about the pain. But we were all very excited to get things back to normal. When I thought everything was going to be good, she told me that she had to do a couple more weeks of therapy. She had improved a lot, but the physical therapist didn't think it was in her best interest to take the brace off entirely. I was a little frustrated about it. I didn't understand why it was taking as long as it was. But then again, I wasn't the expert. On top of that, my wife told me that the time slot for her therapy had changed. She had normally been doing it while I was off work, so I could drive her there and back. The time change was in the middle of the day while I was working. She assured me that driving wasn't going to be an issue since she was doing so much better. It was a lot of minor changes that kind of frustrated me, but I didn't think she was sleeping with her physical therapist. Being the supportive husband that I was, one day I took an early lunch to go check on her at the physical therapy office. At that point, I was allowed to sit in the waiting room while she was in the back. I checked in, letting the receptionist know that I was there for my wife. I sat down for a couple of minutes, and the receptionist asked me if I had the right appointment time. I told her that my wife was supposed to be back there already, and she had an appointment with the physical therapist. The receptionist told me that the therapist I mentioned was out of the office for lunch, so I must have had the wrong time. I thought it was really strange. I never imagined that my wife would be cheating on me. I tried to rationalize it in my head to make it make sense in some way. I drove home, not expecting her to be there at all. However, her car was in the driveway. I was relieved to see that. If her car was home, that might have meant that she ended up rescheduling the therapy appointment or canceling altogether. I walked inside, and I found her in the kitchen having sex with the physical therapist. I was in complete shock. Honestly, looking back, it felt like my soul left my body at that moment. I was crushed to see it with my own eyes. They didn't even notice me for a couple of moments before my wife looked over at me and quickly pushed the physical therapist off of her. I didn't know what to say to either of them. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there. I rushed out to my car and sat there for a minute trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Going back to work wasn't an option, not after what I just saw. My wife came running out of the house, and she banged on my car window for me to open it. After a moment, I rolled it down and listened to what she had to say. She swore up and down that it was the first time anything happened between them. She made it seem like it just happened, as if that made it okay. I was putting the pieces together in my head slowly, and that didn't add up with everything else. She had rescheduled her therapy time to his lunch hour. On top of that, I saw her run out of the house without a brace on, so she clearly didn't need therapy anymore. She had missiled me completely and lied to my face. I told her that I needed some time alone to think, and I drove off. I booked a room at a hotel in town, and I took the time alone there to consider my options. I couldn't be with somebody who would cheat on me. It just wasn't an option. The trust in our relationship was completely gone after that. Divorce was a messy option, but it was the only one I could see. I looked online for some good divorce attorneys and tried to snag up the best one before my wife could. I had a meeting with her, and we started to get the paperwork together so I could officially serve my wife with the papers. Meanwhile, the physical therapist who slept with my wife needed to lose his job. Sleeping with a patient was extremely unethical, and he could potentially lose his license over something like that. I considered that maybe that would be wrong because he was young and new in the industry, but I wanted to get revenge. I reached out to the practice that he worked for, and I told them about what happened. They were appalled when they heard it. They assured me that he would be properly dealt with. When I went back to my house and started packing up some of my belongings, my wife confronted me about that. She said that because she was technically still a patient there, he could lose his license, and that would be ruining his entire life. She was angry with me for telling the truth to his employer. After everything that happened, they were still in contact with each other. I didn't care at all. I gave her the divorce papers and packed some of my things to leave. We did eventually get divorced, and it was a bit of a mess. She tried to fight me on everything, but because we signed a prenuptial agreement where infidelity would void a lot of things, she wound up with nothing. I got to keep the house, both of our cars, and most of our assets. I didn't need to pay her any spousal support or child support. Because I was the provider, I had custody of the children, and she had visitation rights. Her entire life had been ruined because she had the hots for her physical therapist. So was his. I hope it was worth it for them in the end. OP, from what you described, it sounds like you had immense trust in your wife, and she completely shattered that. It's always so sad to hear someone try to make excuses for what is happening because they trust their partners so much. Your wife took advantage of your good nature. I hope the physical therapist does lose his license. Forming a sexual relationship with a patient is unethical and a breach of trust. Your wife blaming you for potentially costing him his license is frustrating. She was the one who slept with him. It would be entirely their own fault. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.